Lahore has lived with smog long enough to mistake survival for normalcy. Earlier this month, the city pushed back. The Air We Breathe, a Dawn media conference under the Breathe Pakistan initiative, brought policymakers, judges, technocrats, and civil society into one room to confront a truth we can no longer look away from. The air crisis is not seasonal background noise. It is a rolling public health emergency and a governance test we keep failing.
We have did some works for the major structural adjustment. For example, the energy using, the industrial, the traffic, and also we take some measures.
It is our most intimate and non-negotiable relationship with our world. We're here to talk about air and the air we breathe.
Just in the morning, experts present that the dust emission is a very important source of Pakistan. So it's also happening in China. In the past 10 years, it's just the most important period of the urbanization in our country. So a lot of construction fields, a lot of road dust. So we make full use of the satellites. So these satellites can help us to address every single one, to study them and to adjust them if they have try their best to control the dust. And also we develop some local sensors and fix the sensor on the top of the taxis. And with the help of these taxis, and they can draft the dust map of the city, of the whole city. So the mayors and the governors can use their the dust cannons to focus on the red part, the most polluted road. So it can save a lot of money.
When it comes to the environment and air pollution, the disconnect is one of perception, I think. People want to have a clean environment. They like a clean environment. They talk about, I have plants at my house and I turn the tap off when I brush my teeth. But these are cosmetic, superficial ambitions. Cleaning the environment or cleaning the air, look at it this way. You have to use the black and white of printed policy paper to manifestly change the quality of the outside air or, say, water.
They want to understand the problems. As I said, as Ghalib said, that Ibn Maryam hua kare koi, mere dukh ki dawa kare koi. So what is the problem in terms of, is it a legislative problem? Is it a judicial problem? Is it an executive problem? Or is this society just not able to see the challenge which air pollution poses?
I speak as a representative of the families who have asked, increasingly worried. Why does our air sometimes look like smoke? Why do children wake up with wheezing chests? Why do our beaches carry debris of other people's waste? These are not abstract questions. They are urgent human questions. Experts point to PM 2.5, fine particulate matter, as one of the most harmful pollutants because of how it penetrates lungs and the bloodstream, impacting children, the elderly, and those with chronic illnesses. In Sri Lanka, we have witnessed an long-range transport from neighboring regions. And we have seen maritime litter accumulate on our shores in patterns that point to transboundary flows. Let me be frank about our vulnerabilities. As an island nation, our geographic position gives us limited control over airborne and ocean-borne pollutants that originate beyond our territorial waters. Seasonal wind patterns can and do carry emissions from distant sources, deposit them on our island. At the same time, internal challenges remain. Some industrial sites and congested urban corridors generate local pollution, and there are important gaps in vehicle standard and enforcement.
While I was emceeing the event, my colleagues from DawnNews English spoke with key voices on the sidelines. Their message was clear: this isn't only an environmental crisis, it's a justice crisis. When laws are written but never enforced, when budgets exclude clean air, and when children can't play outside, the issue stops being about climate alone and becomes one of fairness, governance, and human dignity. The judiciary has often had to lead where policy failed, defining the right to clean air as part of the right to life. But as senior cuisine judge of the Supreme Court, Mansoor Ali Shah reminds us that right means little if judgments never reach the street?
Joining me right now is Senior Puny Judge of the Supreme Court, Justice Mansoor Ali Shah. And given that the judiciary, especially Pakistan, is a very unique country where judiciary had to come ahead, do a lot of driving for environmental policy, and the Smog Commission is a key example of that the judiciary took notice, developed this commission, issued policy recommendations, and that's actually when Punjab really initiated monitoring and policy development. What do you think that the role of the judiciary is already very unique? How else do you see judiciary can drive the conversation forward?
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me over. I think the judiciary over the last 2 or 3 decades has been doing a lot. They've been robustly interfering into the matter, pushing and nudging the government to find solutions to air pollution, climate change, and whatnot. Between what we write and what the actualization of that judgment by the government. So, to my mind, there's a huge governance failure throughout, and these decisions, which are now hailed all over internationally, are decorative to my mind, and they just are nice words, but they don't they don't get translated on the ground, and there's a huge gap, and that disturbs me. So, as far as judiciary is concerned, we've been working on it. I think over the years, it started off with a couple of judges looking at environment. Now a large corpus of judges look at environment. They understand climate also.
That gap between words and action is the real climate injustice, and bridging it begins with political will. Climate justice demands accountability, not charity. Pakistan's policymakers know that the country contributes less than 1% to global emissions, yet it ranks among the most climate vulnerable. The same imbalance plays out domestically. Provinces bear the brunt of pollution and floods while waiting on federal financing and coordination. At the Air We Breathe, Planning Minister Ahsan Iqbal reframed climate justice as economic justice, connecting cleaner air to national survival.
The data is screaming siren. This is not a distant threat. It is our present, painful reality. As of yesterday, our air was not just poor, it was toxic cocktail, a public health emergency. Lahore's AQI at 400 is a red alert for our nation. Every action is a bullet in this fight for clean air. And I say to our international partners and the global community that Pakistan bears a burden it did not create. We are on the front lines of a war we did not start. We are doing our part with limited resources. We call for the urgent delivery and scaling up of climate finance. The promises made in Glasgow and Sharm el-Sheikh must become reality on ground in Pakistan. We need access to cutting-edge green technology on preferential terms to leapfrog the polluting stages of development. We demand that the major emitters of the world increase their ambition and accelerate their net zero timelines. Our survival should not be negotiable in their boardrooms. We have heard the grand announcement at COP after COP. We have seen the press releases and the photo ops. But where is the action? This inaction is fueling the storms that drown our children. Your emissions are the poison in our lungs. We grew up listening, do more, but now we ask the developed world to do more. We don't seek sympathy. We demand climate justice. It is time to move from pledges to projects, from announcements to action. Deliver the $100 billion in climate finance now, not as charity, but as reparations for the damage developed countries have caused. Transfer green technology without punitive patents. Allow us to leapfrog the pollution you caused. Stop the double standards. You cannot preach green transitions to developing countries while opening new coal mines and oil fields at home.
His message was that Pakistan's future growth depends on its ability to breathe. That means modernizing fuels, electrifying transport, regulating industries, and building a financing system that treats adaptation as investment, not expense.
We're joined by Federal Minister for Planning, Development and Reforms, Ahsan Iqbal sir, and he's just delivered his keynote on what is the impact, both economically and in health terms, of the air pollution. What are we planning to do about it, and also how the relationship between the Federation and the provinces should be to come up with a blueprint for delivering clean air in Pakistan. So thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you.
I think just to start off from there, the federal government has taken a lot of initiatives, both in the past and now, particularly for energy, transportation, and the national clean air policy is very relevant here. So the Federation took this step. What are the key initiatives being planned or being implemented right now which are relevant to this subject?
First and foremost, let me compliment Dawn News Group for hosting this conference, which is on a very important subject. When we recently launched our National Development Framework, Udaan Pakistan, it stands on 5 pillars, the 5 E's. And one of those 5 E's is environment and climate change, because our national framework addresses the most critical challenges that Pakistan needs to address, solve in order to have a more sustained and sustainable development in future, the future of our children. So therefore, government launched a national air quality policy in 2023. And because environment is a devolved subject, Pakistan Environmental Protection Agency is now working proactively and actively with the provinces so that we have, but a lot more needs to be done. And one major challenge that we face, not just in improving our air quality, but in meeting the whole climate change challenge, is financing, because Pakistan needs over $100 billion financing. Some estimates even go as big as $300+ billion according to World Bank studies. But what we see is that internationally and globally, while there is realization, but there is no appetite for the global south to be supported. Developed green financing instruments through which we are going into international markets to borrow funds and also to get carbon credits so that we can fund our projects for making this transition after 2010. To me, there are 2 problems which we are now trying to address. The first is that all those areas where devolution was done, we did not create mechanisms for inter-province and central government coordination. So what we have now suggested and we are pushing is inter-province ministers committee in each of those areas where devolution has been done, with a permanent secretariat in the center and with a permanent representative of the province also in those committees to be there so that we can have effective inter-province and province-center coordination.
Justice in climate policy means more than blame sharing between the global north and south. It also means fairness within our borders, budgets that prioritize lungs over subsidies, and cooperation that doesn't vanish when the smog does. For Pakistan's higher judiciary, climate justice begins with constitutional justice. The courts have already declared the right to a clean and healthy environment part of the right to life and dignity. But as Supreme Court Justice Ayesha Malik reminded us, rights are hollow without enforcement. The judiciary's challenge mirrors the nation's to translate intention into impact. Without institutional commitment, reporting, data, resource allocation, even landmark judgments remain symbolic. And as Justice Malik warned, we've crossed the line where pollution is an environmental nuisance.
So the question is that what do we do after we've declared the rights? Well, we've gone on to look at, which is an area that I have focused on particularly, is to look at the regulatory the regulator, the regulatory setup, and where are the gaps. So that's when you realize that for a person doing business, they also need to understand that they have to mitigate whatever the emissions and the pollution they're causing. They have to be conscious of that, and that lies in the, again, that's part of the job of the executive. Before it gives out licenses, it must ensure that this aspect of the matter is looked at. In the same way, judges look at cases and try to sort of carve out a relief for the person before the court. And the story continues even today. So really the answer to your question is that the jurisprudence for the judge evolves when the problems keep coming before them. And the nature and the variety of the problems that at least I have seen, that we have seen together, they show us that there is a big gap. There is a big gap where enforcement and implementation is concerned. And I would say that's probably our biggest challenge, enforcement and implementation.
It's now a full-scale public health emergency that demands coordinated action across every ministry, not just one department.
I have the honor of having caught Justice Ayesha Malik, the Justice of the Supreme Court, right after her address at the Breathe Pakistan conference. So we thought we'd take her insight into how she sees the jurisprudence developing and how the Supreme Court can possibly play a more active role. Ma'am, it's an honor to be seated here with you. First of all, I'd kind of go right into the meat of the topic. You authored a phenomenal judgment that's been claimed globally on the bodily and autonomy rights of women, and I think that really ties into the constitutional rights that are embedded within our constitution. How do you see that judgment and similar jurisprudence that you've activated on the environmental side, because the right to clean air and a healthy environment is a fundamental right of every Pakistani citizen?
So, thank you for having me at the conference. It's been a pleasure. And I think this is an important question. The right to clean air and the right to breathe clean air is a fundamental right. And this has evolved through a rich jurisprudence where the judges have recognized the fact that even though the Constitution does not explicitly grant a right to a clean and healthy environment, but in the right to life and in the right to the dignity of life, judges have read in the right to clean air. And it's a fundamental right, which means that it is fundamental that citizens are granted this right. But with any fundamental right, what's important also is institutional commitment. If you don't have institutional commitment, if you don't have a strong enforcement and implementation mechanism, then this right is what is just written on paper and it's not really implemented. You need resource allocation. You have to prioritize it. It's no longer an inconvenience, an environmental inconvenience. It's become a public health emergency. It is the subset, it's not a subset, it goes through, it's the thread that goes through all departments. Everyone has to think about it, everyone has to talk about it, everyone has to be committed to it.
The story actually in the context of air pollution would begin about 3 decades ago. One of our iconic judges from the Supreme Court, Justice Salim Akhtar, and I need to mention his name because he really got it all started. And this was in 1993 that he took up a case about vehicular pollution in Karachi. 93. And the direction was given that year that the cars ought to be inspected, we need to work on our fuel, we need to have proper maintenance and inspection systems for vehicles in Karachi in order to address the air pollution. Nothing much came about. However, after 9 years, it got decided, and it led to a number of interesting things that happened in that case. For the first time, vehicular air pollution was considered and recognized as a source of air pollution, one of the major sources of air pollution. It was that judgment that had some successes. We got rid of the 2-stroke rickshaw and moved on to 4-stroke rickshaw. That's the time when we moved on to CNG buses instead of the regular buses that were there. And there were certain other directions of getting rid of old buses and, whatnot. So a series of directions were given way back in 1997 when it started, but much later the decision came in 2007. And those directions, some of them were partly accepted. In 2017, we had the first, the law regarding climate change. The Climate Change Act came in 2017, talks about an authority, the apex authority in the country that has to address climate change in the country. There is no authority till date. And the Supreme Court directed recently to go form an authority, and it's been a year and they don't constitute an authority. One, it talks about something very important. The law talks about green fund or a climate change fund, and there is not a penny in that fund. So how do you address the flood situation of 2022, 2025? Is there a budget allocation for air pollution? I don't know. So I mean, the disconnect is rather disturbing, and so judiciary could, we cannot fix air pollution, we cannot fix climate change. We could simply lay down a policy, push the government in that direction, jumpstart few things, but then the government will have to take over, which is not happening exactly.
Climate justice means implementation justice, ensuring that constitutional promises are lived realities, not courtroom echoes. The Lahore High Court has shown what climate justice looks like in practice. Justice Jawad Hassan's rulings link legal principles to lived realities, enforcing emission controls, planting urban trees, and even recognizing a child's plea for her right to breathe. His courtroom has proven that when judicial oversight is consistent and specific, agencies move, budgets follow, and citizens feel the difference on highways shaded by trees, in cities testing vehicles, in neighborhoods where smog alerts trigger policy rather than panic.
53 years ago, we had a constitution, and Pakistan never had right to environment in this constitution. It took us almost a couple of years that the Supreme Court of Pakistan, inshallah Zawabda, PLD 94 Supreme Court has held the right to life under Article 9, means to right to a healthy environment. And after 1994, I must share that we are very lucky that 26th Amendment, that Article 9A was inserted in the Constitution. When I was shifted to Bhavalpur, shirt took 4 days to become black. I went to Multan bench for a couple of months, shirt took 5 days to become black. Now I'm in Rawalpindi bench, shirt takes 2 months to become black. See, this shows what are we inhaling. I am grateful to Dawn, the Breathe Pakistan, what the topic we're discussing. That's the most important thing for us is to talk about. Thereafter, the last issue, the judgment of Amal Sukhera, a 3-year-old girl came to my court last year on 8th of November, that my schools are shut. I can't go to my grandparents' house. I can't go out to my lawn to play. I'm in my house, in my room, with my laptop. Do I have a right, my intergenerational right? I examined the Antonio Abasa judgment of the intergenerational right, that the future generation rights, like Hazur Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam Hadith, and that Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam Hadith was sustainable development to meet the end of future generation, the intergenerational right. We got all judgments of Supreme Court, excellent judgment of the High Court, brought the concept of Article 199(1)A, brought Article 9A, read in Article 9A that you are lucky that you are coming to a High Court after 15 days of the 26th Amendment. You have a right to environment now because you are a citizen of Pakistan. The right to a clean, healthy environment is a part of our constitution. It's my duty to give you that right. I directed the secretary, can you please explain what steps have you taken under Section 15(1), Section 15(2), Section 15(3) on motor vehicle emissions, and what steps you're taking under Section 33(4), that have you made rules and what rules you've made? Why aren't you checking motor vehicle and its pollution? The answer is they are taking action now. There is now a robust kind of campaign by this. I can see EPA Manik Sahab sitting here, can explain that you are now taking action. I can see a half glass full, but I'm seeing as a full because I must say that it took them almost 28 years of the law. At least they woke up and stood with us.
But as Justice Mansoor Ali Shah cautions, real change needs more than judges. It needs civil society lawyers who keep cases alive, parents who demand cleaner air data, and governments that stop using smog as seasonal PR.
I have the esteemed privilege of having Justice Jawad Hassan of the Lahore High Court with me here today. He's probably the most forward-looking judge in all of the high courts in terms of environmental jurisprudence that is coming out for the country at this point in time. Sir, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the Breathe campaign conference. Firstly, I'd like to kind of dig deep into the jurisprudence that you've created and all the work that you've done on smog and air pollution. You've really been a trailblazer both in Lahore and in Rawalpindi. So I'd like to ask you, what do you think is the most pressing concern or the gaping wound, which is why there is a gap between the jurisprudence that is the High Court is delivering and the executive action that is taking place, which is leading to our current situation?
I think, thank you for inviting me. The most important issue is that when we brought the Environmental Act 1997, we have the Section 15, and we had to implement that section regarding motor vehicles. Air pollution is defined, air emission is defined. The law has been there for almost 30 years. But it talked about other issues on environment, specifically on air pollution, while Lahore is the most polluted city in the world. There was a time when everybody's minister came in the court and said, we can't plant trees in jungle or forest. We want trees in the city. They sat down, the urban unit prepared a peri-urban policy where tsunami tree plantation concept came. Jaleel Tareen, who was the minister at that time, everybody came inside and we passed the judgment that now the entire government functionary will have a peri-urban policy. Wherever there is a land, you have to plant trees, and even to the extent that the Society's Registration Act will also have the house to have 2 trees outside their house. The concept of tree cutting, I talked about the entire laws in Pakistan. A 3-year-old girl, Amal Sukhera, came to the court and she said, I am 3-year-old, I don't have a right to breathe, I cannot go to my lawn to play, I can't go to school, they're shut, I can't go to grandparents, I can't go, I'm stuck with home in my iPad. I'll share with you the order that government has now, I was got a call to have a sticker on my car. So, because Section 15 says no person shall drive the motor vehicle if it doesn't have a testing, fuel and maintenance from the government tested laboratory to have a sticker. This is a positive impact for Pakistan.
But more importantly, the civil society. Where is the civil society? I mean, look at India, look at any other country. The civil society actively pursues the matter. They come to the court, they ensure that they sit through the public interest litigation and take it to a conclusion. We don't see any public interest litigation coming our way. Where are the people? And if they're going to sit at home and just crib about air pollution, crib about climate, nothing's going to change. So they need to very forcefully come to court, monitor the cases, and I think a lot more public interest litigation ought to come to the court, which if you look at the entire population, I think it's just a minuscule, a fraction coming to court. And I think more lawyers need to be trained in this, but more judges ought to be trained in this also. The training and the capacity is important, but I think civil society along with the government have a role to play. Look at your air pollution. My granddaughter is unwell. She is unwell because she can't go out and play with her friends in the garden. Why is that? I mean, somebody is responsible and we need to do that. We need to do something about it. And I think it's serious.
In the end, climate justice is not just about carbon. It's about equality between rich and poor, state and citizen, present and future generations. From Lahore's courtrooms to its streets, the demand is the same. Clean air is not a privilege. It's a right. I'm Mahin Azam Khan, and this is Front Seat to Climate Change. Today's episode was recorded at the Air We Breathe conference in Lahore. You can watch the full conversations on DawnNews English. Until next time, breathe carefully, act collectively, because justice begins with the air we share.